My name is Jean-Luc Stamp. I'm a graduating senior in the Studio Arts program with a minor in Anthropology. And I'm really excited to share my senior research through my presentation, Just Playing in the Mud, Cultivating an Active Relationship with Your Environment. So before I get into my nitty-gritty part of my research, I'm going to show you a few landscapes. And as I go through, I'd really love it for you to reflect and think about some common themes that might just pop into your mind. What's the first thing that you're thinking of? So I'm going to go through a little bit slowly. And as these things pop up, just shout them out. I'd love to hear them. What do you guys think? Natural, that's a great one. Anything else? Dry, yeah, that's one that comes up often, especially here in the Southwest. What else? Local? Awesome. Yeah, so one thing that might not come to your mind is that all 4 of these locations are man-made spaces. Each of these have been integrally altered by humans to serve specific purposes, whether reservoirs, industrial districts, whatever. However, these spaces come off as wild and natural and beautiful. And it really brings into question, what is a man-made landscape? And what is the separation, if there really is one? And so this brings me into my conversation on the lie of unspoiled wilderness. So now this is a philosophy that's prevalent in our conservation culture here. And it's this belief that the wilderness exists in this state other than and untouched by people. And that once humans are involved, they can only degrade this landscape. This image is a wonderful paragon of this, taken in Yellowstone, only a few years after the Native Americans were systematically and legislatively removed from this land that they had cultivated for thousands of years. And yet, here they are, coming into this place, pretending that it's untouched. And so I really want to bring into this conversation and talk about this relationship of shame that we have with our environment. And hopefully inspire you to change that, to flip that on your head and no longer allow this fear or shame of damaging the environment, but instead reveling in the fact that you are a part of it. So, before I get into my research once more, I have a couple of questions that I want you to just stew over as I go through. How do you understand your surroundings? You know, when you're driving down the road, are you looking at the different environments? Are you watching the trees change to grass? Or are you just a viewer, just a passenger? Are you an active participant in that environment? You know, when you're hiking, are you interested in the flowers? Are you getting down, looking for specific things? Or are you just, wandering through and enjoying the day? And lastly, when does this engagement, when does interacting with an environment become exploitive? What does that feel like for you? And is it even going to happen? So, with that out of the way, I want to talk about my senior research and why I chose ceramics for this. Ceramics was my avenue to engage with my environment because clay is everywhere. Rather than a material, it's a particle size. So even organic materials can be used in clay. However, not all clay and not all small particles have those desirable effects that we're looking for. And really the best way to do is to just explore it. They're infinitely recyclable. As long as you don't fire a ceramic piece, it can be returned to water and remade 1,000 times. And this really helps you hone your craft and work on a way to really find an intimate relationship with this environment. And lastly, it's a way to express an environment. Even 10 feet apart, 2 buckets of clay will be completely different, aesthetically, chemically. They'll turn out in entirely different ways. And this is really an amazing way to sort of freeze these aesthetic qualities of a landscape in a way that you can project to others. I want to return to these landscapes and talk a little bit more why I chose these 4 images. These 4 images were the source of my research. I have harvested clay from all 4 of these locations. And the reason I chose these man-made landscapes, in addition to have this conversation about engaging with your environment, is they were already a really sort of a shortcut for me to harvest my clay. These are already places where people are digging and really exposing some of these layers that makes my job a lot easier with a little bucket and a little shovel. There's a lot of ways you can really see this clay on the landscape, and it requires sort of a conversation. One of these visual cues is this wonderful mud cracking you see here at the bottom of the image. These mud cracks form as the water seeds, and this clay is able to kind of keep its form. But it cracks because all of the particles are too similar, and so as they shrink, they sort of crackle up. This is a wonderful example of maybe a good clay source, somewhere that you'd want to look at. And honestly, before I really even got into this project, seeing this sort of landscape on the side of the road sort of, tickled me funny. I recognized it, and I feel like I just need to put my hand in it. And that's really a lot of where this research came from. Once you identify that spot, it comes down to processing. All about returning these different minerals down to that fine particle size. You can do that dry with grinding and lots and lots of sieving, but it takes a lot of mechanical energy and a lot of time. And so for the majority of my project, I use wet processing, which really uses water and gravity to help you speed up this process. And so as you introduce the soil to the water, it sort of stratifies and layers out. And so only the fine particles remain at the top, and the bigger ones can be removed. Once you only have those fine particles, the water will settle, and it can easily be scooped off, dried out, and is ready for work. And what was so amazing about this process was each sample I dug, I had no idea how it would turn out until after I went through this processing stage. And you can see even here, they look radically different after the same processing. So once you get this processed material, this is when the expression really begins to kick in. This is when that conversation can happen. You are being intimate with this material. It's in your hands. You're exploring, okay, I got this from a sandy soil. I can feel how it's moving differently. You're thinking about, not just the material, but also where it came from. And so for my research, I decided to use a mold. And so this is a little video of my process. And so I used a plaster mold so that I could recreate and replicate exact pieces so that the inherent aesthetics would really shine through. And so here you can see, after the clay has been kneaded into a usable form, I add it over the mold, let it sort of drape down, and then I'll go back through, cut it clean, and just let it dry. And as it dries, the plaster will suck the moisture out, and it'll pop right off. And that's how I made the majority of my forms. And so through this process, I was able to create identical forms that really showcased this dramatic and dynamic materials. So, returning back to this photo, I want to show you these clay bodies that I harvested. So, from Lemon Lake, in this top corner, I harvested a red micaceous clay. This one was my favorite because micaceous means that it has these wonderful flecks of mica throughout the entire piece. So when it's illuminated with a light, it just glimmers with little gold sparkles. From Horsetooth Reservoir, I harvested a sandy white clay body. This one definitely gave me some of the most trouble. I probably remade that form 3 or 4 times before the clay really was doing what I wanted to get to do. From Cortez, I harvested this wonderful black clay body. And I was so excited. I remember walking with my bucket, seeing the clay, and I'm like, this is the dirt that I'm digging. And it's black. It's going to have this amazing, amazing color. But as you can see from these small little test tiles that represent the clay after they've been fired, it completely changed on me, turning to this sort of brownish yellow color. And at first, I was a little disappointed because I really wanted that black clay body. But at the same time, it was just such a wonderful surprise and really showcases how dynamic these materials are. And lastly, from Mormon Lake, I harvested a black or a brown clay body. And I wanted to use this image because it really sort of highlights the trial and error in this process. This is a conversation. You don't get the whole information just right off the bat by looking at it. And it takes going through the process to really understand how these materials work. To the best of my knowledge, this material was too fine. And so as it dried, it just couldn't hold the strain and just cracked apart on me. And because I was working with deadlines, I wasn't able to remake this one. But it happened many, many times. This piece was overworked. You can see the color difference on the small shards compared to the large bowl, where they had dried a lot faster and just cracked on me. But I was able to take that same clay, return it to water, and remake that same form again. So, to leave this off, I wanted to kind of express this image because it really gives you this feeling of putting something into the kiln and leaving it and just letting it be, and then getting that, opening it up, and to see what had happened. And even though that I had done countless test tiles of all of these different clay bodies, I was still really surprised. So I really want to show these final pieces that really culminate my senior seminar. From Lemon Lake, the micaceous red. And this one had this wonderful mud crack that really reminded me of the place that I gathered it. And I think these reflections you can see in the landscape. From Horsetooth, the sandy white, this one didn't break as much. This one was a little bit more loose and plastic, as we say. And so it wanted to move a little easier, and so it didn't crack as much. And lastly, the Cortez bowl, the one that was just full of surprises. Because once again, while now I had known that it would come out as this sort of yellow color, I lifted the bowl out of the kiln, and it had this incredible interior pattern that I have no idea how that happened. It just no idea. And I remember I showed my mentor, Jay, and he had no idea. It was just a wonderful surprise, and just something that really connected me to this place. And it makes me think about, going back to that sand, digging through the dirt, and really sort of like being there and experiencing this really, really tactile element. And so I want to end this off with one last question. And I want to ask you, where do you fit in your environment? I'm not necessarily asking you to go and process your own wild ceramics, although I hope you can see it's achievable. And I really just wanted to inspire you to reimagine these landscapes that surround us and get rid of that shame that we feel for exploiting. But when it comes down to creative expression, it really doesn't become exploitive. It becomes a way for you to really engage with an environment and have a conversation. And so with that, I want to conclude my talk. If you have any other questions or would like to see more of my work, I would love for you to check out my website, Jean-Luc Stamp. And there also is a place for questions. So thank you so much.